The air shimmered like ripples on water, distorting the distant view of extraction machinery that hummed with relentless purpose. A constant stream of sulfurous fumes mixed with the acrid smell of superheated rock, creating an atmosphere as oppressive as the heat itself. Deep within Mine Sector Gamma on Cygnus X7, the temperature hovered between 50 and 60 degrees Celsius. A brutal environment by any standard, but especially for those whose biology wasn't evolved for such conditions. Kale grunted as he wrenched the calibration rod of the thermal drill one final quarter turn, feeling the mechanism click into proper alignment. Sweat poured from his brow, darkening his already stained synthetic uniform. The salty droplets stung his eyes, but he didn't dare wipe them away, not with Overseer Zalter watching. The Kthar's supervisor towered nearly 7 feet tall, its crystalline, iridescent scales shifting subtly as they efficiently dispersed heat throughout its silicon-based body. The reptilian being's multifaceted eyes narrowed as it observed Kale, the vertical pupils contracting with visible disgust at the moisture dripping from the human skin onto the metal floor grating. Hydrator. Zalter's voice resonated with a low hum that carried sharp, cutting edges. Contain your leakage immediately. Your inefficiency contaminates this facility. Kale bit back a retort, keeping his eyes fixed on his work. Around him, other miners glanced away, not wanting to attract the Overseer's attention. The derogatory terms were nothing new: leaker, wet skin, hydrator. All slurs the Kthar used for humans and other water-based life forms. Apologies, Overseer, Kale muttered, tugging at the neck of his uniform. The standard issue moisture containment suits were supposed to help, but they frequently malfunctioned in the extreme heat, becoming more like portable saunas than protective equipment. Zalter made a dismissive gesture with a crystalline hand. Complete the recalibration and move to Sector Delta 9. The primary extraction nodes require maintenance. The Kthar turned away, scales gleaming under the harsh industrial lighting, a perfect picture of environmental adaptation. When his shift finally ended 4 hours later, Kale collapsed onto his bunk in the cramped living quarters assigned to human workers. His muscles ached from the constant strain, but he couldn't rest yet. He reached for his personal data pad, tapping the screen to reveal the image he looked at every night, a smiling girl with the same dark hair and blue eyes as his own, though her face was thinner, paler. Not much longer, Lena, he whispered to the image. Just a few more months. The debt his parents had left behind when they died in a shuttle accident had fallen to him, along with the responsibility for his younger sister. The mining corporation had been quick to offer a solution: work it off in their geothermal operations on Cygnus X7. For Kale, the choice had been simple. What he hadn't anticipated was how the polluted air of the mining facility would affect Lena's already fragile lungs. The spore contaminants in the lower residential sectors were slowly killing her. Every credit he earned went towards securing her passage off-world and treatment at a proper medical facility. A heavy thump against the wall interrupted his thoughts. Jorda, a stout grok from the adjacent quarters, pounded on the thin partition that separated their living spaces, a signal that it was time for their shared meal. Kale tucked the datapad away and headed for the common area. The mess hall buzzed with the mixed sounds of various species. Groks like Jorda panted heavily, their thick fur trapping heat despite being partially shed for their time on Cygnus X7. At another table, a group of insectoid thrinine clicked their mandibles nervously, exoskeletons making soft chittering sounds as they consumed nutrient paste. Humans clustered together, bound by their shared physiology and challenges. "They've cut water rations again," said Tam, a woman from Earth's Asian colonies, as Kale sat down with his tray. "Say we're misusing resources for unnecessary biological functions." "Meaning we sweat too much," Kale replied dryly, looking down at the pitiful cup of water next to his protein ration. "My molting cycle is approaching," chittered Zix, a thrinine who had joined their table. An unusual but not unprecedented crossing of species lines. "Without proper humidity, my new exoskeleton will crack." I requested accommodation, but Overseer Zalter denied it. Jorda snorted, his snout flaring. They believe only in the superiority of their crystalline forms. To them, we are all evolutionary failures. The conversation drifted into weary silence as they ate. This was their camaraderie, a fragile bond forged in shared misery under Kthar management. From a raised platform at the far end of the mess hall, Zoltar observed them all, perfectly comfortable in the sweltering heat. A living embodiment of the Kthar belief in their inherent biological and technological superiority. None of them could have known that within 24 hours, that superiority would face its greatest test. The first warning came as a high-pitched whine that cut through every communication device in the facility. Kale was deep in Sector Gamma, securing an unstable rock formation when a noise pierced his eardrums like a needle. Seconds later, red emergency lighting flooded the tunnels as klaxons began to wail. "Attention all personnel," the automated system announced, its synthetic voice eerily calm. "Critical solar event detected. Cygnus X primary star experiencing major flare activity. Radiation shields at 70% and declining. Emergency protocols engaged." Kale froze, drill still vibrating in his hands. The Crimson Sun, as the miners called Cygnus X, was normally stable. For it to flare with enough intensity to trigger facility-wide alerts meant something catastrophic was happening. The comms crackled to life with Zoltar's voice. All workers maintain positions. Engineering teams to cooling stations. Security teams to evacuation routes. The overseer's tone remained controlled, but Kale detected an unfamiliar note, tension. Before anyone could respond, a violent tremor shook the mine shaft. Dust and small rocks showered down as support beams groaned under sudden stress. The temperature, already oppressive, noticeably climbed. "Planetary shields buckling," reported the automated system. "External temperature surge exceeding safety parameters. Facility cooling systems at 115% capacity." Throughout the tunnel, other workers looked at each other with growing fear. A second, stronger tremor knocked several off their feet. Lights flickered ominously as power fluctuated. The bulkhead at the far end of the tunnel suddenly sealed shut with a pneumatic hiss. Seconds later, the one at the opposite end followed suit. A low rumble accompanied a shower of rocks from the ceiling. "We're trapped," said Tam, voice tight with fear. She had been working nearby, reinforcing support beams. Kale activated his comm unit. "Sector Gamma, 12 to control. We're sealed in with unstable sealing conditions. Request immediate assistance." The reply came broken and distorted. "All sectors experiencing issues. Temperature 70 degrees and rising. Backup systems failing cascade. Stay. Positions." The final words were drowned out by another tremor, this one bringing down a section of the tunnel ceiling 50 meters ahead. Dust filled the air, making breathing even more difficult in the rapidly increasing heat. Jorda, who had been working the same section, stumbled toward Kale. The Grok's breathing came in labored pants, his thick fur now a deadly liability. "Cooling systems must be failing," he gasped before collapsing to his knees. Near the collapsed section, a Thry-9, Kale recognized Zix, was frantically trying to burrow into the rock wall, instinct overriding reason in a desperate search for cooler temperatures. 3 human miners huddled near an air vent that now blew hot air rather than cooled. The situation deteriorated with terrifying speed. Within minutes, the tunnel temperature had climbed past 70 degrees Celsius. Kale felt dizzy, his lungs burning with each breath. Salt stung his eyes as sweat poured down his face, soaking his uniform completely. Yet, as he looked around at the others, he realized something startling. He was still functioning. Uncomfortable, yes. In pain, certainly, but still moving, still thinking. Jorda lay unconscious now, his body temperature dangerously high. Zix had stopped burrowing and curled into a protective ball, exoskeleton clicking rapidly in distress. The other humans were conscious but immobile, conserving energy. A sudden, Urgent beeping caught Kale's attention. On the wall near the main thermal extraction junction, warning lights flashed on a massive valve control. The digital readout above it showed pressure levels climbing into the red zone. If the pressure wasn't released, the superheated steam would rupture the pipes, filling the tunnel with lethal vapor. Kale staggered to his feet. The manual override for the valve was designed for Cthar strength, a deliberate design choice to keep lesser species from tampering with critical systems. But there was no choice now. He grabbed the large wheel with both hands, feeling the metal burn his palms through his protective gloves. With a cry of pain and effort, he threw his full weight against it. Nothing happened. "Help me," he shouted. Two of the other humans struggled to their feet and joined him at the wheel. Together, they strained against the unyielding metal. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, the wheel began to turn. Steam hissed from release vents as the pressure gradually decreased. By the time they had fully opened the valve, all three humans were drenched in sweat, gasping for breath in the suffocating heat. But they had prevented an immediate catastrophe. The coolant started flowing again, not enough to make the tunnel comfortable, but enough to prevent temperatures from climbing even higher. "Good thinking," rasped one of the miners, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor. Kale nodded wearily, looking around at their sealed prison. The comms remained silent, emergency lights still casting everything in an ominous red glow. He had no way of knowing if this was happening throughout the facility or just in their section, no way to call for help. All they could do was wait and hope their bodies could withstand the heat long enough for rescue. Hours passed with excruciating slowness. The coolant valve had stabilized their situation, but temperatures remained dangerously high. Kale had distributed the remaining water among the conscious workers, prioritizing Jorda, who had finally regained consciousness but remained dangerously overheated. Intermittent bursts of calm static occasionally broke the silence, carrying fragments of information. From these broken transmissions, they pieced together that the entire facility was in crisis. The solar flare had been unprecedented in intensity, overwhelming the planetary shields and causing cascading failures throughout the mining complex. Cthar rescue teams, difficulty accessing, temperatures exceeding, equipment failure. Came one transmission, cooling suits malfunctioning, limited operational time. Came another. These snippets painted a disturbing picture. Even the Cthar, with their heat-resistant physiology and advanced technology, were struggling against the sustained extreme temperatures. In a secure monitoring station 3 levels above, Vyra watched the disaster unfold across multiple screens. Unlike most Cthar, the xenobiologist's fascination with other species overrode the typical disgust. Now, as she monitored the fragmented biometric data still transmitting from various sectors, a pattern emerged that confirmed her long-held theories. "Interesting," she murmured, multifaceted eyes narrowing at a particular readout from Sector Gamma 12. Despite the extreme heat, the human life signs showed sustained function. Some had elevated heart rates and concerning core temperatures, but they remained conscious and mobile longer than expected, longer even than some Cthar in similarly affected areas. She pulled up the sector's recent activity log, noting an emergency valve operation that had prevented a catastrophic steam release. The human named Kale was prominently mentioned. Vyra had noticed this particular specimen before in her studies. His physiological responses to heat stress were especially efficient. Her contemplation was interrupted by a priority alert. The life support junction for several trapped sectors was failing rapidly. The junction was located in a zone now reaching temperatures of 85 degrees Celsius, deemed thermally inaccessible for standard Cthar teams without extensive preparation. Without intervention, sectors Gamma 12 through Gamma 17 will lose life support within 30 minutes, the automated system announced. In the command center, facility managers were scrambling to find solutions. Vyra established a direct comm link to Sector Gamma 12. "This is Science Division. Is anyone receiving this transmission?" After a burst of static, a strained voice replied, "This is Kale in Gamma 12. We read you. The life support junction for your sector is failing. Without manual intervention, oxygen recycling and remaining temperature control will cease in approximately 30 minutes. Silence followed. Then what needs to be done? Vira uploaded schematics to the sector's emergency terminal. The primary relay requires manual reset and recalibration. The junction is located in subtunnel Epsilon, approximately 200 meters from your position. That's through the collapsed section, Kale's voice replied. Correct. There's a maintenance shaft that may still be accessible. But be advised, temperatures in that area exceed 85 degrees Celsius. Thar rescue teams cannot reach you in time. Another pause, longer this time. I'll go, Kale finally said. Voices in the background protested, but Kale's response was firm. I'm still moving better than anyone else here. It's our only chance. In her monitoring station, Vira watched the human's biometric readings with scientific interest. His core temperature was elevated but stable, his systems functioning at remarkable efficiency for the conditions. The Cthar xenobiologist made a decision that could cost her position. She diverted power to activate the emergency terminal's advanced functions, giving Kale access to detailed thermal mapping of his route. You have additional data available on your terminal, she said neutrally. Use it wisely. In Sector Gamma 12, Kale stared at the suddenly enhanced display. With surprise, someone up there had just bent some serious rules to help them. He quickly downloaded the thermal map to his personal datapad. I need volunteers, he announced to the others. The maintenance shaft might be navigable, but I'll need help. Jorda, still weakened but conscious, lumbered to his feet. My strength could be useful, the Grok managed. Zix uncurled from the protective ball the Thry-9 had maintained. I can navigate small spaces, the insectoid chittered. My exoskeleton provides some heat protection. With no time to waste, the unlikely trio gathered what supplies they could: water packs, electrolyte supplements from emergency kits, basic tools. Kale studied the thermal map carefully, plotting the route that offered the lowest temperatures. They had just reached the collapsed section when the comms crackled again. This time, it was Overseer Zalter's voice, strained but authoritative. Sector Gamma 12, this is Overseer Zalter. We are aware of your attempt to reach the life support junction. Kale hesitated before responding. We're proceeding to the junction now, Overseer. A pause followed. When Zalter spoke again, the words seemed forced through crystalline teeth. Proceed, Hydrator. Failure is not excused. It wasn't encouragement, but it was authorization. That was enough. The journey through the maintenance shaft was nightmarish. They crawled through spaces barely large enough for Jorda's bulk, the metal surfaces hot enough to burn exposed skin. Kale led the way, consulting the thermal map frequently. His entire body streamed with sweat, the constant evaporation the only thing keeping his core temperature from reaching fatal levels. Ow! Much farther. Jorda wheezed behind him, his fur matted with moisture from the few sweat glands his species possessed. Kale, check the map. 50 meters. The junction should be just beyond the next vertical shaft. Zix, moving with surprising agility despite the heat, chittered anxiously. My sensors detect increased temperature ahead. We must hurry. The final approach to the junction was the worst. The vertical shaft rose 20 meters, with narrow maintenance rungs set into the wall. By the time they reached the top, Kale's vision was swimming, his hands blistered despite his gloves. The metallic taste of extreme dehydration filled his mouth. The life support junction itself was housed in a small chamber filled with equipment. Emergency lighting cast the room in a dim red glow. Warning indicators flashed everywhere, and the air was so hot it physically hurt to breathe. There, Kale gasped, pointing to the primary relay panel. Its display showed cascading failures throughout the connected systems. With trembling hands, he began the reset sequence while Jorda held tools and Zix navigated the smaller access points that required precision manipulation. Time blurred as they worked, every movement requiring immense concentration. Finally, the main display shifted from red to yellow, then a beautiful, steady green. The ventilation system hummed back to life, immediately pushing slightly cooler air into the chamber. "We did it," Kale whispered, before his legs gave way and he slumped against the wall. He was alive, but barely conscious, his body having reached its limits. In the monitoring station, Vira observed with scientific fascination as the life support systems came back online. The human had succeeded where Cthar teams had deemed the task impossible without specialized equipment. She marked her observations carefully in a private research file. For 3 days, the crisis continued. The solar flare's immediate effects gradually diminished, but it had triggered something far more dangerous: destabilization of the planet's geothermal core. Runaway reactions in the primary magma conduits beneath Mine Sector Gamma now threatened a catastrophic eruption that could shatter the planetoid itself. Emergency evacuation of non-essential personnel began, but with limited spacecraft and damaged launch facilities, it would take weeks to evacuate everyone. And if the geothermal instability wasn't contained, no one would escape. Facility Director Forlag arrived from the capital installation, his crystalline form larger and more ornate than ordinary Cthar, befitting his high rank. He surveyed the command center with obvious displeasure. "Unacceptable performance at every level," he pronounced, multifaceted eyes focusing on Overseer Zalter. "You've allowed inferior species to handle critical systems. This report indicates a human access the life support junction." "With all respect, Director," Zalter replied stiffly. "Cthar teams could not reach the affected areas in time. The temperatures. Cthar challenges require Cthar solutions," Forlag interrupted. "I have brought such a solution with me." At his gesture, the command center doors slid open to reveal 6 Cthar soldiers in gleaming, bulky obsidian armor. Each suit featured glowing plasma channels that pulsed with blue-white energy, and their helmets contained enhanced optical sensors that gleamed with cold purpose. "The Pyre Guard," Forlag announced with evident pride. "Equipped with experimental plasma-based heat dissipation systems and neural accelerators. They represent the pinnacle of Cthar engineering, designed to conquer any environment, no matter how extreme." The soldiers moved with practiced precision, their armor humming with power. Their leader, Commander Malachur, stepped forward and saluted Forlag. "We await your orders, Director." Forlag gestured to the main display showing the critical magma conduits. "The geothermal instability must be contained. Experimental thermal dampers must be installed directly into the primary conduits to stabilize the reactions. The environment is hostile, temperatures exceeding 90 degrees Celsius, toxic gases, and unstable structures." Malachur nodded. "The Pyre Guard was created for such challenges. We will not fail." "See that you don't," Forlag replied. He turned to address the entire command center. "Observe the difference between engineered superiority and primitive inefficiency. While leaking organisms struggle to function, our technology transcends biological limitations." The xenobiologist Vira, standing at her monitoring station, frowned slightly at the director's words. Her research suggested a different perspective, but this was neither the time nor place to voice such heretical thoughts. As the Pyre Guard prepared for deployment, Kale and the other survivors from Sector Gamma had been relocated to a medical recovery area. Though still weakened from his ordeal, Kale couldn't help overhearing the technicians discussing the geothermal crisis. "If those conduits aren't stabilized, the whole planetoid could fracture," one said in a hushed voice. "The evacuation ships won't get half the personnel off in time." Kale thought immediately of Lena. Her evacuation priority was low. The corporation valued productive workers first. If the planetoid fractured, she would have no chance. He accessed a nearby terminal, searching for information about the stabilization effort. The technical schematics were complex, but he understood enough to recognize the enormous challenge. The Pyre Guard would need to install massive damper components deep in the magma conduits, where heat and pressure were at their most extreme. A soft ping alerted him to a message on his datapad. The sender was anonymous, but the content was detailed information about the Pyre Guard deployment, including known technical specifications of their armor systems. At the end was a simple note: Biological adaptation sometimes surpasses technological solutions in specific environmental contexts. Kale stared at the message, suspecting its source but unable to prove it. He studied the information carefully, noting that while impressive, the plasma cooling systems had finite operational time and required cycling to prevent overload. When the pyre guard departed for the conduits with great ceremony, Kale gathered Jorda, Zix, and a few others who had recovered enough to move. "I don't think they'll succeed," he told them bluntly. "And if they fail, we all die, including everyone waiting for evacuation." "What can we do that elite Cthar soldiers cannot?" asked Tam, who had joined them. "Their technology has limitations our biology doesn't," Kale explained, showing them the information he'd received. "Their armor needs power cycling and has operational time limits. And according to this, the specific radiation and particulate matter in the conduits may interfere with their systems. You propose we attempt what they might fail to do?" Jorda rumbled, disbelief evident in his voice. "Not exactly," Kale replied. "According to the schematics, there's a manual fail-safe mechanism near the final damper placement point. If the primary installation fails, that mechanism could at least buy time for evacuation ships." Zix's antennae twitched nervously. "The Cthar would never authorize such an attempt. Which is why we don't ask permission," Kale said grimly. "We use maintenance tunnels like before." They gathered what supplies they could without attracting attention. Through a series of unauthorized terminal accesses, possibly aided by their unseen ally, they obtained schematics and access code for the maintenance routes leading to the deepest conduit, the area designated as the Crucible. By the time they reached the outer perimeter of the conduit system, reports were coming in about the pyre guard's progress. The elite soldiers had successfully installed the first 2 dampers and were proceeding to the final location. Director Forlag's smug announcements echoed through the facility communication system, praising Cthar ingenuity and superiority. But at her monitoring station, Vyra watched the pyre guard's biometric and system readings with growing concern. The armor's power consumption was spiking beyond projected levels. The soldiers' internal temperature regulation was showing subtle but worrying fluctuations. Commander Malachur was pushing his team too hard, ignoring warning signs in his determination to prove the director's faith justified. Meanwhile, Kale's group navigated ever closer to the Crucible through narrow maintenance shafts that grew hotter with every meter. They moved slowly, conserving energy, taking frequent water breaks. Kale's uniform was completely saturated, sweat pouring from his body in a constant stream. The others were suffering similarly, Jorda panting heavily, Zix's exoskeleton expanding and contracting rapidly to dissipate heat. They reached a viewing port that looked down into the Crucible itself. Far below, they could see the pyre guard maneuvering the massive final damper into position. The chamber was an inferno. Heat shimmers distorted visibility, metal glowed dull red, and the air itself seemed to waver like liquid. "The manual failsafe is on the far side," Kale said, checking the schematics. "We need to reach that console once they place the damper." They watched as the pyre guard struggled with the enormous component. Even through their advanced armor, the effects of the extreme environment were becoming evident. Their movements, initially precise and powerful, had become slower, less coordinated. Suddenly, one soldier froze mid-motion, then slumped to the ground, armor locking into place. Another cried out over the comm system, a sound of primal pain that echoed through the chamber before collapsing unconscious. Commander Malachur, visibly enraged, attempted to lift the final component alone. Warning lights flashed across his armor as he strained against the massive weight. The plasma cooling vents sputtered, emitting irregular pulses of energy rather than the smooth flow they had displayed earlier. System failure cascade initiated, announced an automated voice over the facility comms. Pyre guard armor reaching critical temperature thresholds. Immediate evacuation recommended. Malachur ignored the warning, taking another staggering step forward. Then his armor emitted a high-pitched whine. The plasma vents went dark, and the proud Cthar commander collapsed amidst his fallen squad. The elite soldiers, engineered and equipped specifically for heat resistance, had succumbed to the very environment they were designed to conquer. Now, Kale shouted, leading his team toward the access hatch that would take them down to the crucible level. The heat hit them like a physical blow as they entered the main chamber. The partially positioned damper loomed before them, precariously balanced but not yet locked into place. Beyond it stood the fail-safe console, their only hope. Kale pushed forward, each step an agony of effort. His vision swam, darkness creeping at the edges. The searing air burned his lungs with every breath. Behind him, Jorda summoned his species' legendary strength for one final effort, while Zix skittered across surfaces too hot for the others to touch. They reached the fallen pyre guard. Close up, Kale could see the Cthar soldiers through their armor visors. Their crystalline scales had lost all luster, turning dull and brittle in the extreme heat. The pinnacle of Cthar technology lay defeated by the same environment that Kale, with nothing but his primitive biological cooling system, was still navigating. With one final surge of effort, Kale reached the console. His hands, swollen from heat and dehydration, fumbled at the controls. "Zix," he gasped. The Thry-9 immediately understood, using delicate manipulator appendages to input the activation sequence, while Jorda braced the damper component, preventing it from slipping out of position. Red warning lights shifted to amber, then green as the failsafe engaged. Mechanical clamps secured the damper in place. Coolant began to flow through previously dormant channels, and stability indicators gradually moved away from critical levels. Kale collapsed onto the searing deck plates, consciousness fading. His last thought before darkness claimed him was of Lena, hoping he had done enough to save her. He awoke in a medical bay, the blessed cool air a shock to his system. For a moment, he thought he must have died, but the ache in every muscle confirmed he was very much alive. "The human regains consciousness," announced a familiar resonant voice. Kale turned his head to see Overseer Zalter standing beside his bed, alongside the Cthar xenobiologist he recognized from facility records as Vira. "The damper?" Kale asked, his voice a ragged whisper. "Successfully installed and functioning," Vira replied. "Geothermal stability has been restored to acceptable parameters. Evacuation continues as a precaution, but the immediate danger has passed. My friends, the Grok and Thry-9 are recovering, as are the others in your group," Zalter answered. Something in the Overseer's tone had changed. The contempt was gone, replaced by something that might, in a Cthar, resemble respect. "And the Pyre Guard? Recovering as well, though their pride has suffered a more severe injury than their bodies," Virus said, with what sounded almost like amusement. "Director Forlag has been recalled to the capital to explain the failure of his pinnacle of Cthar engineering." Kale tried to sit up but found himself too weak. "My sister, Lena, has been transferred to the orbital medical facility," Zalter interrupted, "by direct order of facility administration. Your debt has also been cleared in recognition of your service." Kale stared at the Cthar Overseer in disbelief. "What?" Zalter seemed uncomfortable, scales shifting in a way Kale had never observed before. "The incident has prompted a re-evaluation of certain biological adaptations previously considered inefficient." "What the Overseer means," Vira interjected, "is that the facility has been forced to acknowledge that sweat glands proved more reliable than plasma cooling systems under specific extreme conditions." She activated a data tablet, displaying a research authorization. "I have received funding to study diverse biological thermoregulation, with a focus on resilience through variety rather than specialized adaptation. And you have been offered a choice," Zalter continued. "You may leave Cygnus X-7 once medically cleared, or you may accept a new position as cross-species safety advisor, helping to implement protocols that recognize the unique capabilities and limitations of all worker species." Weeks later, Kale stood on an observation platform overlooking the mining operations. Sector Gamma had been partially reopened, with enhanced safety measures and monitoring systems. The heat was still oppressive, but the atmosphere had changed in ways more significant than temperature. He wiped sweat from his brow with a deliberate motion, no longer feeling shame in the biological function that had saved not only his life, but countless others. A Kthar worker passed nearby, nodding almost imperceptibly, a small acknowledgement that would have been unthinkable before the crisis. The largest change was in Kthar attitudes. The open mockery of humans and other wet species had disappeared, replaced by a stunned, grudging silence from most, and genuine scientific interest from some. Vira's research was changing understanding of biological adaptation throughout the facility, arguing convincingly that diversity of approach offered greater collective resilience than specialized superiority. Lena's treatments were progressing well. In a few months, she would be strong enough to travel, and they would need to decide whether to remain or start fresh elsewhere. Part of him longed to leave the mines behind forever, but another part recognized the importance of the work he could do here, bridging the gap between species that had previously seen only each other's weaknesses, not their complementary strengths. His datapad chimed with an incoming message: engineering specifications for a new type of environmental suit designed collaboratively by Kthar and human engineers, incorporating both technological cooling and accommodation for natural perspiration. The subject line read simply, "From weakness, strength." Kale smiled and turned back toward the heart of the facility, sweat already beginning to bead on his forehead. No longer a mark of shame, but a badge of unique capability, another tool in the complex arsenal of survival that spanned species and worlds.